Good, Yogi. It's really a pleasure and always a privilege and honor to be with you and talk to you.
Thank you for
That's how,
having me on the show.
yes. No, thank you very much. And I am here on behalf of Asia Coaching Network. I am very intrigued and I would like to know more about the focus over the last couple of years, which you have placed on business and functional leaders mentoring. Now, this is something which, and you are using a particular way by which is mentoring, you are looking at from the Rogerian technique. That's something which you have studied and you are practicing it as. So you are some of the very few members, as I did my search to find out,
Mhm.
who believe in this and who practice it. And for an organization as vast, multi-billion dollar, organization, you are having the opportunity to practice. So you'd like to know more about this. One of the first questions that I would like to start with, how has the CXO coaching and the coaches, they have changed in terms of their perspective over the last maybe a couple of years or 2, 3 years also as such?
In the last 2 years, the change that I find from the client side, if the CXO or the equivalent level is what we are referring to, number one, the client seems to be more keen and asks for the coaching rather than the company sending the client for what I call as remedial coaching. Now we understand that coaching and mentoring we can use interchangeably for the purpose of this conversation, and we understand that this entire initiative is meant for changing behaviors, or rather helping an individual to change leadership behaviors rather than trying to change or instill any domain expertise as such. So the change that I find besides the two which I mentioned is that CXOs and the equivalent seems to be wanting in this lonely world some kind of a sounding board, a person with whom they can bounce off an idea. The reason for this is, I mean, maybe the sounding board idea is not that new. Maybe it was there earlier too. I think the nature of the sounding board now for the client is a bit different because things are changing so fast, things are becoming so unpredictable that they would expect the sounding board to be helping them in dealing with what appears to be a little bit of a hostile kind of an environment in some cases, an unpredictable environment, an environment which is scary, an environment which seems to be, something which you can't at all predict. So I think they're looking at those who are able to think on their feet and ask you the right kind of questions as sounding board. The other thing is that in the West, at least, coaching is in fashionable to have a good coach. They're expensive. And I guess from the client side, it's not a bad idea if you're a thriving, successful client to say, you know what, I have a mentor or I have a coach. And it could be a little bit of flavor of the day thing also. I also think that while traditionally a mentor is supposed to be a friend, philosopher, and guide, I think in the new context, in the last 2, 3 years, mentors are becoming more friends than philosophers and guides. What are you guiding? I mean, you don't know what you may not have the same kind of knowledge, first of all, as the mentee. The mentee has to make the mentor successful in the entire process. The mentor is only half a player, or maybe less than half a player, and the mentee is the one who has to adapt to new behaviors that would help the situation. And therefore, what is referred to is the mentor's own experience. And I think that the behavioral coaching happens truly effective manner when the mentor is ready to make disclosures about his or her vulnerability and the moments when he or she could change. Now, from the coach side, what are the changes? From the coach side, I think the new skills that the coach has to acquire is very different from the old ones. First is coaches have to train and have to ask questions of coaches or mentees, as you want to call them, about the skills to be future ready. What does future ready mean? What is the kind of resilience that a CXO will require to face a very, very unpredictable, turbulent kind of world? How does a CXO build an agile organization which can uh, seize the moment, which can make changes which are very, very, very sharp in terms of the turns the organization takes? And how do they carry all the constituents and followers in this whole process? And I think finally, mentors who can help mentees to speak from the heart and not from the head, not about just profitability and figures and financials, but to speak about how they themselves are weathering the storm, um, how they feel in a particular situation, their hopes, their aspirations, their dreams, their worst fears, what keeps them awake in the night, and so on. So self-disclosure, because most of us have grown up in leadership theories which center around the great man, charismatic leader, walk into the room, papers will fly, people will stand up, you will salute the person, you will bow in reverence. I think the times have gone from there. I think the identity of the self in the case of a good leader depends upon how good the followers are, the ability to grow talent around you, take the best, nurture them, great listening skills, knowing when to back off, and humility, of course, are very, very important in this entire journey. So these are the big changes. I think the triple bottom line, or if you like to say the ESG agenda, has become extremely important. So, firstly, people amongst the stakeholders, employees, customers, investors, suppliers, communities, very, very important. Second is the planet, the sustainability agenda, and third is profits. Not necessarily in that order. So that is something
Yes.
also very important for
Right.
mentors to consider when they're talking about and thinking about organizational stewardship and the responsibility to the organization. Please go ahead.
Yeah, great. Is there, as I say, that coaching that I often put up, they are gasping for breath, so to say, recently, as rapid challenges in business are sometimes overwhelming, and more so in the context of the present times. So, how do you see our coaches, bracing up to this? Do you find that they are able to take this up and sufficiently so?
I can't make value judgments about all mentors and coaches, but I am very deeply influenced by an article which I read in Harvard Business Review, I think in the beginning of the 2020s. In this context of today's whirlwind kind of era of change, what is very important is the art and science of making a good judgment. Now, judgment is different from a decision. Decision is something which is very action oriented. You've already gone through a process of thinking. Judgment is when you have to find the grays between the white and the black, the elements of what you will consider, how you will consider what the cohort's view is, different stakeholders' views are. I think this is extremely important. And planning in this sort of a situation, borrowing a little bit from Thinking Fast and Slow by Tversky and Kahneman, I think the ability to zoom in and zoom out and very carefully plan is very important. So the mentee cannot be a superman or a superwoman, but there are some minimum competencies that are essential or behaviors that are essential. Number one, dismantling organizational orthodoxies. Oh, we've done this for years. The courage and the ability for the mentee to dismantle those in a careful manner, not like some kind of a Rambo. The second is understanding organizational biases and understanding your people very keenly. The third, when you talk about this whirlwind of change and catching your breath, how do you influence people through digital media? I mean, you're seeing me today with shoulder up or something like that, a little below the shoulders and up. You're seeing me two-dimensionally. You can't see me 3D, you can't see my eyes, you can't see my leg movements. There's a whole lot of me you can't see. So how do you influence digitally? How do you stimulate new kind of thinking? How do you, in this kind of an environment, stimulate thinking, which is breakthrough thinking, leverage the moment, and rather than planning for years together, looking at how the next quarter and the next quarter is going to be and building for that. These are very, very important abilities that the mentor coach has to build in mentees and coaches.
Uh, do you think, are we asking for too much?
We're not. I mean, every mentor and coach have their own bunch of strengths. In my case, I'm involved very intensely in mentoring a whole lot of people in some of our listed companies and L&T itself. And I have a lot to learn from them. And I'm not saying this with manipulative humility. I'm saying this because um, in the process of the conversations that we have, by the way, in my style of coaching or mentoring, as I prefer to call it, I like to go through the life story. Now, I know that many famous coaches say, let's go forward rather than going back, and there's no point of doing that. I like to find relationships between the past, the experiences with the mentee has been through, what has influenced her or him, and the perception of the 180 or the 270 instrument on various leadership behaviors of the person. So some of those competencies can be mediocre. Some of those could be very strong. You cherry pick a few which will really make a big difference. But you don't cherry pick in a stereotype manner. Just because the person is in business development, you don't take up behaviors and competencies around customer only. There are a whole heap of other competencies also which are important. Uh, so I think I would show the menu to the mentee and the coachee and ask this question. In your life, in your career, what are the 2 or 3 things that will make an enormous difference? Let's focus on those first. And then let's move on to the others.
Now, how do some of these coaches get, some of the best one of these coaches, they get trained, because if you have to be cutting edge, there has got to be certain institution or certain experiences which you have to go through to acquit yourself well. So, in your mind, as to how can this happen?
I think different mentors have different stories to tell you about how they've done it. Many have certifications, many have hours and hours of coaching or mentoring, like pilots. My story is a little different. I've built it up by, first of all, going through a formal program on counseling, not mentoring or coaching. I've gone through, as you introduced me in the beginning, a very rigorous program on non-directive counseling, the Kharkov model, which is based on Carl Rogers' non-directive counseling. So listening, personalizing the problem, labeling the feeling are all fundamentals that I picked up. Then I built on that layer by layer by equipping myself with the insights that social psychology experiments give you. Social psychology experiments are very relevant even in today's context. People have forgotten about Milgram and forgotten about, you know, uh, people like Solomon Ash, or like Philip Zimbardo. I mean, they are greats, and their work was, of course, in a controlled environment, but there's a lot to learn from that. I also put another layer of studying the economic environment of business. I'm an economic student, basically. So I like to study that. And then willy nilly, I got immersed into business issues through the mentoring process. And I also thought to myself, if I was this person, what would I do in this situation? And we sort of co created a lot of learning through that process. So it's been listening, reflective thinking, reading, revising, testing, which has taught me. So you can say it's my own little bachelor's program in mentoring.
Yeah, as I see it, as as you were speaking, it was coming in that you have uh, you have devised the curriculum of a master's class for yourself.
I think every mentor, every coach has to be very reflective in understanding what is their own learning style. I discovered that my learning style is phygital, which means I use a combination of physical and digital. I use a Nikon camera for my wildlife photography. It's a good camera, but it's got enormous amount of controls and information which I still don't understand fully. So sometimes I sit in front of a YouTube, the camera in my hand, and I fiddle around with the
Ah,
settings.
okay.
So that's physical as well as digital. I find my method of picking up things and implementing them on the field is much more efficient that way. So it's important to understand your own, we are not going to college anymore. We don't need to necessarily, learn in a particular manner, but understanding how you learn is very important. Whether you learn by listening to others through books, through conceptualizing, through YouTube, through podcasts, or by just reflecting, all
Yes.
very important. Very
Right.
true.
Okay. Now coming to the Pan Asia coaching network systems which are there as such, how do you see it evolving? Do you see it a very disparate sort of a way by which coaches are doing their own things, or you think there can be a synergy by which we can have a common way by which a certain commonality can be built in?
Evidence based mentoring programs which are shared across Asia and which reveal the context of a particular country, the context of different sizes of companies in the country. For example, a chai bowl may be completely different in terms of culture as compared to the big, huge, heavy engineering companies in Japan or in India or Singapore or wherever. So I would say that it's a great idea. We must draw up a very specific agenda so that we are not all over the place. To your point on uniformity, not so sure. I think the uniformity in terms of a set of values, the usual confidentiality, not sharing or disclosing some of the things that you hear and see, being ethical in what you charge, those could be spelt out. But I don't know whether there should be one way throughout Asia. I think it should be snipped and cut and shaped according to the country's customs and ways of doing things. If you look at the work of Hofstede, who is a very famous, shall we say, culture guru, he talks about various nuances of culture through the world. And there is something called power distance, which means the distance between the top person and the person right below in the manufacturing shop floor or project or whatever. The power distance in all these countries varies immensely. Vietnam may have one, Japan may have one, India may have one. Some may be much more hierarchical. A startup in India is totally non-hierarchical. So I think the nuances are immense, and therefore one has to look at what the gurus also are saying with respect to culture surveys, plus understand the local nuances of each place. Mentoring in each of these countries will have to incorporate those nuances. The learning styles are so different that makes it imperative for the mentor to also adapt to those learning styles which are pertinent and relevant to that country.
You see, coaching is many times taken to be very elitist in a way. which means only the CXOs or maybe one level below that, or people who are high potential people. How do we, look at that? But there's a huge number of people who are there who need to be, their issues, their problems have to be, addressed. And how does one, address this need of organizations and, of course, in society also? How does one do that? What is your thinking on this?
I think that organizations that have a coaching culture should be able to train their managers in a number of coaching skills. Uh, to be a coach, you don't need to be an absolute master. It's the art of asking the right questions, it's the art of listening. So programs on how to coach are very important to cover a large number of people. And I think a coaching culture is extremely important for the success of the company. It's impossible for you to find so many coaches and so on. Second, yes, it appears to be elitist, not because of the coachee alone, but also because of the fees charged by the coach. Coaching very often is mistaken to be something meant for remedying a behavior. It's not for remedying a behavior. You can build on a behavior. Positive psychology is all about developing resilience and flourishing. It's not about, you're digging up negatives. Maybe in the process, you yourself discover those. In that, I think both the coach and the coachee can benefit a lot. And if it could be a symbiotic relationship, which is made through dyads right from the time a person joins as a mentor, some people call it a buddy mentor program. Some people call it a mentorship program. Some people call it a coaching program. I think the culture is very important, where everyone gets a chance to talk to a friend at work who can offer something which is important for that person's development. Behavioral coaching is going to be more important than any time before. It's an evolving field. It's a field which has caught more attention in the last 15 to 20 years and has become sharper and sharper now. It is unfortunately a go-to kind of a program when people think that they need to be improved. I mean, other people decide that this person needs to be improved in certain ways, therefore send him off for coaching and so on. I think a person who can afford it, not in the financial sense, but also in the sense of giving back to a coach because of his own profound insights, should have multiple coaches, coaches for domain, coaches for a sounding board, coaches for behaviors, coaches for how do I come out in a meeting, coaches for how do I speak. I think multiple coaches would be useful. And finally, I think there are tremendous amount of lessons to learn from the field of sport. A coach can be nasty in the field of coach. He can push you till you cry. He can push you because of the pain of flexing your muscles in a particular way, but the coach loves you actually. And the coach will push you to any limit to make sure that you win, because that's your aspiration. I tell you right in the beginning, if you're a softie and can't take the stress and strain of the coaching, don't come to me. So great coaches are people who test the endurance of their coachee, because they know in real life, when the moment comes and the searchlights are on and there are thousands of people watching the person perform on the track, it's going to be very stressful. And at that moment, the person has to show and give the best.
Excellent. In fact, Yogi, thank you very much from
My
Asia
pleasure.
Coaching Network to have given your valuable time and your insights, which, as usual, always give food for thought.
Thank
And
you for
as
the opportunity.
yes, and as coaches and as an organization, we look forward to your association in future too with your views.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you very much.